Welcome, everyone. The goal of this meeting tonight is to hear from the subcommittee that's been looking at the local zoning regulations. We understand that if you can, maybe if it works without getting it really dark.
Yeah, there are a couple of them that sometimes you can turn off on the far side.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that's the fire.
Make it dark.
You could try clicking one of those and see what happens.
I mean, I can still see those names if, yeah, that's fine. That's a little better. Does that work okay for you, for the camera? Okay, great. Well, I think I said the goal of the meeting today is to discuss the development regulations and to start to consider if the housing committee will have what role we might want to play in that conversation, understanding that the planning commission is also, has a process, and the development review board probably has its own process as well, but we'll consider that in the context of the work that Tim and Sandy have done, which we'll hear about tonight. So at the next meeting, I'll send you something between now and the next meeting, but that's going to be the sole topic for this evening. We have a couple of folks from the housing committee that can't be with us in person. We have Alex and Ben and Carrie on Zoom. So if you all want to participate in the conversation at any point, and anyone else, we'd be happy to hear from you. Before I get into the topic for today, are there any public comments? Please.
Yep, Steve Whitaker. Couple of things I want to raise is that I want to distinguish the housing needs assessments that the city council directed an RFP be issued for, and staff converted that to a sole source contract with the Regional Planning Commission for $7,000 in the justification of economy, but it's not going to be what's needed to evaluate, for instance, proposals for Country Club Road. Until we have a market study of feasibility and absorption and how many units of what price point could we sell or occupy or rent where, we won't have the information we need while these big decisions, like giving away 30 or 40 acres of land for $1, are being made on our behalf. Now, it's also worth noting that at the December 8th Planning Commission meeting, in response to public comments, the commissioners revealed that they were told they were not to plan for Country Club Road. Country Club Road is being handled separately by the city council, and that's a violation of statute. And so we are flying. I think this committee needs to come up to speed on what it wants and where its opportunities are for housing and where they're not. And statutorily compliant planning with public engagement and scrutiny is the foundation of our Chapter 117, Title 24. And so if that's been denied us, we should rely more on committees like this to raise a stinking cry instead of me having to do it in court for a year or two, right? It's an unfair burden to put on a sole individual. But a housing needs assessment, as is being done, is really just a data gathering. And you heard Christian here at the last meeting say that a housing market study is more like a $60,000 to $80,000. So what I'm recommending both to potential developers as well as the housing committee is to ask for at least half of that from the city budget process, which means it needs to get in there tomorrow if it stands a chance of being voted on this year as part of the but they're doing funny things like claiming to be saving money by taking $100,000 out of the sidewalk fund and doing the stairs with it, and then saying, well, that's a vertical sidewalk. So don't get me started on the condition of our sidewalks. But my point is that a market study that defines what's the absorption, how many units of what price point, where, rental versus owned, can we absorb in this area over the next 10 years? Or I don't know what's feasible or what's accurate in doing a market feasibility study. But Tim will know more about this than me, and he may not put any credence in market studies. But I don't think we're going to get what we need to act on out of the data gathering that the Regional Planning Commission is doing. And separately, our capital budget and program, again, where do you want to focus housing opportunity? We don't have a statutorily compliant 5-year capital budget and program. And the one we do have has no mention of water and sewer up into Sabin's pasture, for instance, which to me is the low-hanging fruit. I think anything at Country Club Road is going to be years out. And if we want to look at where housing could happen sooner, it would be maybe between St. Paul and Maine, you know, I keep leaning on Tim, and Sabins and possibly Terrace. And those, we need to put capital money in there. There was a TIF district, there was opportunity for low interest funding, and that was recklessly yanked out from under in order to get Country Club Road in. And no one knew that no one was managing the brownfield. And we don't even know the depth of the toxicity there. The delineation of depth has not been done whatsoever there. So this pretense that we're gonna, you know, start building up there this year or next is really a fallacy, and we really ought to be analyzing what our other options are. And should we be putting, you don't have to know where the capital money is coming from to put it in a capital budget and program and have council approve it. You just have to put it in priority: roads, sidewalks, water, sewer, where. And over time, you have to define where the money's gonna come from. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Peter.
Peter, you're on mute.
Peter, you're muted still.
How about now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I just have a minute. I've got people coming in minus 5 minutes. I didn't follow everything Steve was saying, but I'll say this. I really appreciate the fact that you have some working groups going. But I just would caution about siloing. I mean, I think Steve's comments suggest that we need to have a holistic approach in which everybody is aware of and coordinating with what others are doing. For example, Alyssa, you're mentioning the DRB. The DRB doesn't do what you seem to think they do. They implement. They don't make zoning. They don't make zoning rules. They don't even recommend rules. They implement zoning rules. So I think this is a brand new committee, but you guys, I urge you not to get too siloed. And I think that the first thing that Steve mentioned, which is a very good example, which is a market study. It's really hard to know where to put your chips. Say with pasture, which unfortunately I agree with Steve, is going to be years out. I'm going to be surprised if many of the developers come back with a real bid. Already, I think a lot of them have dropped out, and some of the really big ones who know what they're doing said, no, you guys aren't ready for this at all. And then there's Sabin's Pasture. I see that Alan Goldman is actually at this meeting. Has anybody talked to him about what they would need to get started? Maybe it is low-hanging fruit, maybe it isn't. I don't know. Do any of you know? I know that I've tried to get some small projects started here in the city over the past 5 years and been frustrated each time by the implementation of the zoning rules, which are just too tight in order to allow a small developer like me or a potential developer like me. So I guess my message just is, don't get too siloed in your subgroups. Make sure that there's a lot of communication And I would, in particular, take a look at the need for a market study, which could really guide where to put the chips. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to respond, about our process, so at the next meeting, we will, well, the last meeting, each of the subgroups reported back, on what they would recommend for priorities. We created a priority, draft priority list, but then we had an open conversation about what would make it, raise it to the top of the priority list versus like the last quarter of the priority list. And I'm gonna take a crack at ordering that list for the beginning of the next meeting. So we will be able to have some of these bigger picture conversations, I think, around that. This tonight, as I was saying, will just be focused on the development regulations. I would like to hand it over to Tim at this point to talk a little bit more about the work that him and Sandy did. I see Sandy's on Zoom. And then we can think through, I should just like set expectations that we are not going to go through the development regs tonight. What we are going to do is talk about at the highest level, like what we hope for them to achieve. And we're gonna go macro and decide how micro we want to get in this conversation, but it's gonna be a very big picture conversation, probably the start of a conversation. So why don't I hand it over to you, Tim, and you can talk about what you all have done.
Yeah, thanks, Alyssa. I think that's exactly right. And Sandy, I'm in, I think you've all seen the piece that Sandy wrote after we had a conversation as a committee.
Are there any copies? Are there any?
Oh, well, I've got one here you can have. Because I've also got it on my screen. Thanks. So basically, I think the big picture question is, we have a really thick zoning code. It's about 217 pages long, plus there's additional sections for if you're in a flood hazard area, which adds like another 68 pages or something. It's a lot of regulation, and it's kind of been built over time. So it's layered. I think the more I look at it and try to navigate it sometimes, the question really becomes, wouldn't we be better just to start over and get a nice, fresh, contemporary piece that could be more understandable for citizens, and that I think would function better? But I think the real question here for tonight is just getting your thoughts on, I guess, two questions I've got for all of you is how many people in this process tonight have read the entire unified zoning regs?
No, I have not read the entire.
That has, I have, I think probably Sandy has, and certainly Mike has. Dan has. But gives you a good sense. Anyone on the?
I mean, I flipped through this, but not,
Eric got
Yeah.
that was a fun.
yeah.
Tim, can I add something when it's a good time?
Yes.
Looks like Alan
Just-
has.
Identify themselves with.
Sandy, can you identify yourself? Would you mind identifying yourself and then feel free to weigh in?
I'm a member of the Housing Committee. I just simply wanted to add, Tim did a really good introduction there. In the last 3 weeks, have been looking at every paragraph of every page of the zoning ordinance. I think I've disclosed this already, but I am on one of the developer teams for Country Club. And there are some really good things about our unified regulations, development regulations. There's some really good things. It is very helpful to someone trying to lay out a design to have very specific fact and objective numbers to go for. I think that just the sheer pile of it really intimidates a lot of people. And then there are a lot of, I think, innocent vaguenesses that are grounds for appeals. And a bunch of other architects and builders are looking at this exact issue right now. It's in the State House, but trying to think about how to minimize hearings and minimize appeals is an important way forward for all of Vermont. And I think the question that Tim is posing is, does Montpelier want to be on the forefront of that? Um, I'm just give one super quick example. I was looking yesterday at farm stands. And in general, everyone loves farm stands. They encourage local commerce. They're kind of innocuous. And so we have very subjective, vague guidelines for what a farm stand could be. It opens up any project to an appeal. So developers tend to stay away from things that are going to expose them to appeal. And the hearing process is unnecessarily long in Vermont. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. So, I used to be a regulator. And I understand the concept of like, you have a law and then you have regs and then you add a layer and you add a layer and you add a layer. And it is tough to, it does become burdensome over time. Some agencies will take a process of continuous improvement where they might bring stakeholders in and they might redo pieces of it. And there are times where it warrants starting fresh. I think it would be good to hear from the city, their process for updating the regs, just so that can inform the conversation that we're happening today. Mike or Matt, would you be willing to just talk through how you periodically update, like your thinking around the updates to the regs?
Yeah, so Mike Miller, Planning Director. So we went through a comprehensive zoning rewrite. So I was hired in 2014. We already had the comprehensive rewrite going. We'd already hired a consultant from outside to work on it. And so the document we have today, which was adopted in January of 2018, was part of one of those comprehensive rewrites. And it was framed by our consultant, and we worked through a lot of the pieces. And we've made a number of amendments since 2018, usually about one a year to go through, because it takes a long time to go through the adoption process. But it's important we go through, we use the document. It lets us flag the items that are issues. If there is vagueness, we note those and we bring them back. We talk about them with the Planning Commission of what was the policy that we wanted to implement. And we clean these up. And over the years, we've done a lot to clean up the site plan regulations, the design review regulations. But still, even in 2018, when these were adopted, we recognized there were a couple of places, subdivision regulations being one of them, that needed a lot of work. But we weren't getting a lot of subdivisions. So we were prioritizing those items that were important and that we were seeing a lot of. The design review, the sign regulations. These are applications we get a lot of. And we wanted to make those more efficient and clean those up. So we recognize the Planning Commission and planning staff. We've recognized there are areas in here that are stronger and areas in here that are weaker. But the process is that these go through the Planning Commission, in a normal sense. There is an outside avenue to end run the Planning Commission with a petition to go directly to City Council. But 99% of the time, these are handled through the Planning Commission, who will take a number of recommendations. They'll review them for the policy changes. We make the policy changes. Those then get forwarded to City Council. They will have some public hearings and then adopt those changes. So that's, in a nutshell, the process. But the adoption process from when the Planning Commission says, okay, we have a red line version, to when it gets adopted could be 3 to 5 months. Because of the public hearings and because of the input. It can take a little bit of time. So we don't have the opportunity to kind of do these really quickly. So we look at this about once a year. We try to get a good chunk of them, make a number of improvements, and then go through. I'll just comment on the one of the idea of starting over as a professional planner. I've written more than 30 zoning regulations. I've done this a lot. That would not be a path I would recommend taking. I would definitely go on let's take what we have and work on it. I would not have, when I was hired, gone on the path of rewriting the zoning. I would have taken the old zoning that we had and worked on cleaning it up in an iterative fashion, because we have gone through and done these little changes where we look for the vagueness and we look for the inconsistencies. And we've already kind of found all those. Now we can find some more and keep fixing it. When you start over, what you're going to end up with is a whole bunch of unintended consequences because the new structure will be different. It'll have these inconsistencies that you have to kind of start over with. We certainly can. It's a policy decision. Staff will do whatever council directs us to do. But from a staff recommendation, I think you would be more quickly getting to the goals you want by taking the document you have and going through and saying, okay, these are the big changes that we need to do. Because by and large, there's a lot of changes there. And as was pointed out, the Planning Commission currently right now is going through a rewrite process. We have a new Planning Commission. So what we've been doing over the past 3 or 4 months is going through chapter by chapter. We're just got to conditional use. That'll be next Monday. We'll start in conditional use and PUDs. And so we've gotten our way past halfway, and that'll give us, we wanted to educate everybody because you can talk about a piece, but a lot of times, well, if we change this piece, it's going to change this piece. So we really need to teach you the whole zoning. Then we can go back and say, all right, let's talk about redlining. If we want to change something, do we want to change it up front or do we want to change it in back? Or if we change it here, we also have to change it here. And they'll kind of understand the context a little bit more because it's not always just a one change here. Sometimes it has consequences. So those would be some of my overview pictures on amending the zoning.
Thank you. Tim?
Yeah, and kind of to follow through my thoughts is having lived through zoning for a long time here too, including before you were here, it was, and I look at like, we want more housing in our community. We're trying to open the doors and create more housing and welcome more people into town. And I really do believe from my experience working under different zoning codes at different times that the growth of this code, and it's become such a difficult thing to navigate. And it's as much as there's a lot of clarity and for some people with specifics, it's also overly controlling and stifles creativity. So it's not a black and white good. So I think of the last time real housing was created here was in the 1980s. And if we went back and kind of looked at what the zoning code looked like at that time, when people were actually able to take the risk and invest and create housing, it was a fraction of this. And even into the mid 90s, I think the last street that was created in Montpelier that the city took over, we built at North Park Drive. And the zoning code, after that, nothing happened other than a few downstreet projects. There's been a couple of things, but no, not the volume, not the kind of housing we need. And I think we've got to look back to why was it happening then and why isn't it happening now? And I really think a lot of the reason is right in front of me. And not to say the zoning code's bad. I think academically, it's probably a really good piece. I think you do good work and I'm not criticizing that. But the question is it a workable piece that we as a community can work with that's going to get us where we want to go? And that's where I think the weakness is. So the question for this group, and luckily there's a number of you that have read the code, so you have a sense of it, is how do we fit into the whole picture? And if we do, in terms of planning commission discussing it and the rest of the process, how do we see it going? How do you all feel about it? Is it Mike's approach of just keep working on this current code and making modifications? Or is it like someone like me who's worked through it and it's just, there's so many layers to it. I just don't want to bore you with crazy details, but it's like, and it's everything, like you said, from people trying to get a sign on a new business in town. If you're in a historic district or design control district, you want to change a window or do something little. If we walked you through the steps of that process and you had a full understanding of what people in our community are going through to do anything, I think you might feel differently about this. For all the times I've gone through it, nobody's ever said, hey, how'd you feel that process went? Was this step productive? Was that step productive? I feel like I spend a lot of money on engineers and professionals. That's it doesn't contribute to a better product when I'm done. And I think that's built into this and built into the way we enforce the code. So that's kind of my question for you is if we come to the table is, if any of you have had experience with it, how's it felt to you?
Yeah, Dan.
As somebody who read the code in the leading up to this meeting, it took about 2 days. I don't think I was bored during it. So it seemed reasonably well laid out. I guess I have two questions, one for Mike and one for you, Tim. For Mike, you mentioned unintended consequences. My understanding, and I think this is a point you brought up at a previous housing committee meeting, is that having the code is prerequisite to a lot of Act 250 stuff. So in terms of like bare minimum, what's required, I'm curious what your thoughts are on what the what rewriting the code, what the bare pieces would need to be in order to meet some of these state required review criteria. And then to Tim, the pieces of the unified regulations that were like, that stuck out was the 20 pages related to signs, or I think maybe 7 pages related to signs, 20 for PUDs, many for the central historic district, where things did seem more onerous in an aesthetic way, but maybe not in a not in a land use sort of way, that like the setbacks and whatnot. So I'm kind of curious, like what your experience is with those pieces, because building in the historic district, yeah, that seems like a really sort of hard piece. But in terms of new developments, new buildings outside of that district, there wasn't a ton that I saw in my reading of the regs, and I'm not an expert, and I also wasn't, you know, I don't have a good read on like the booby traps in it for developing something like Country Club Road, or for Safe and Pasture, or whenever those projects come to fruition.
Why don't we go to Tim and then Mike, and then I'll go Alex, then Peter. Did anyone over here, their hands up? No. Or did you, Lauren? And then Lauren.
Big questions there.
Yeah.
Thanks. I guess to start, I mean, I think in terms of the Act 250 requirements, I mean, a lot of communities around us have different zoning codes that have different masses to them. The only other town I've developed in other than Montpelier was Berlin. And it was a dramatically different experience. And it was a project that had been through Act 250 and complied. So you can have a far less comprehensive code than this and qualify for Act 250. And in terms of our own zoning code, with like trying to understand how it doesn't maybe work or accommodate, even with the city, with Country Club Road, you know, when the city bought that land, the way it was zoned like a low density residential. Is that right, Mike? So
Yes.
the project that's being proposed could never happen up there.
Right.
Under the current, we literally had to change the zoning to be able to develop this property for the city to do it. Well, I guess the question I have is, why didn't we change the zoning to allow anyone to do that? And also, why did we just change it for this one piece of property and not, if this is really our goal and this is what we want to do, why didn't we also change it for the Sorcy Goldman property and some other abutting properties that are of similar characteristics? So I think within this, what I find is people get into it and they literally have to make changes to the code to accommodate a project that we want to do. And that doesn't seem like very good unified zoning regs to guide us if we're having to change them. It really just uses a blockade to stop anything you want to stop. But if you want to create anything, you've got to get a special permission.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I can answer those in somewhat a little bit backwards fashion, because I'll start with Tim's comment. So, so we did in 2018, when we put the zoning in, we did propose to change all of Sabin's Pasture, and we did. The proposal that came out of the Planning Commission was not the same that got adopted by council. Council did something slightly different, but it did come in with a similar amount of demand. So we did zone Sabin's Pasture to be developed. And it comes down to its ability, and this goes for the Crestview and some other properties, they have access to sewer and water. At the time we wrote the regulations in 2018, Country Club Road didn't have access to sewer and water, so it was zoned rural. It also was an active golf course. So it wasn't really perceived as a area with development potential because it was actively being used as a golf course. So that proposal didn't come up. We do go through and periodically take and shift people. Once you have access to sewer and water, you're in those areas that are residential 9,000 and less. So these zoning districts that allow very high density housing. It's just in the rural district. Rural is basically the default. If you don't have access to sewer and water, you're in rural. So occasionally we'll get parcels that may shift inside. So you may have where the car wash is shifted from riverfront to a different zoning district, basically because the line was over here and we just moved it over here because it could accommodate a use that property owner was working on. So we can do those changes. That same discussion would come up with any new zoning rewrite. If you rewrote the zoning and wanted to remap the city, we'd be going through and probably finding areas where we don't hit something exactly what we want in the future. So these things will happen, these smaller changes, but big picture, that's why they are. Some of the points on some of the consequences of the smaller regulations that were asked about. Yes, so there are requirements. If we were to not have subdivision regulations, then we would go from a 10-acre town for Act 250. So commercial properties need to be on a 10-acre parcel. It would become a 2-acre, well, it would become a 1-acre parcel. So that goes down. We would also lose our designated downtown. That's also needs design review. So there's certain requirements. We have to meet certain requirements in order to be eligible for certain programs. And we're talking about trying to get in to be a tier 1A. That will completely exempt a large portion of our developable area in the downtown from Act 250. That will make housing development much easier, especially for our smaller developers. And I think this has been pointed out, but in case somebody wasn't here when it was talked about, the bigger issue with the Act 250 is not the individual small projects. Folks will come in and do a 2-plex or a 4-plex or a 6-plex, and you're doing these small projects. Those are all under Act 250, but they're cumulative over 5 years. So as soon as you've got a 4-plex and you do another 4-plex, you're done for the next 5 years. Or that next duplex that you do, that duplex has to go through Act 250. And that's a very long, very expensive process. So getting the tier 1A, while yes, it helps with Country Club Road, it's a much bigger, we're not just doing that for Country Club Road. That's being done because it's going to help development all across the board. But in order to qualify for that, we have to do our part. Part of the argument is we're gonna stop doing Act 250 review on you guys because you do your job so well. And if we go through and cut ourselves back to a point that it's like, hey, we don't want to do it and we don't want you guys to oversee it, that's not going to go. And so that's there is that line there that we have to keep an eye out. And then
Line that a little, I just kind of lost you in there.
So there's going to be a line. We don't know where it is because there is no tier 1A application yet, but somewhere they're going to go through and they're going to, when we apply for tier 1A, we have to send our zoning regulations and they're going to be reviewed at the state to ensure that we meet a minimum standard, a minimum standard. What that is, we don't know yet, but the expectation is you have to allow certain districts to be over 4 stories high. We do that. We need to have design review. We do that. We need to have, so there's certain check boxes that we need to check off, and we have to have zoning and we have to have subdivision regulations. That's a requirement. So there'll be certain ones we have to go through and check off in order to qualify. The last piece I did want to comment on, big picture related to these, is some of the reason why the regulations were so small in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and why they're so much bigger now. And a lot of that comes down to case law through the environmental court. In particular, decisions like JAM Golf is one of the big ones that really changed how we have to regulate at the local level. Act 250 doesn't have to meet the JAM Golf requirements. If they did, they would have to drastically change Act 250. But they're allowed to get away with very vague rules. Local municipalities are not. So we need to have a lot of specificity in our bylaws to meet those requirements. In the past, our design review regulations used to be 5 sentences. Can't have an impact on historic resources, can't have an impact on scenic resources, can't have an impact on this. It was like 5 sentences. It's like, that is so far from meeting the JM Golf requirements of being able to have a developer should be able to read the rules and have a reasonable understanding of whether or not their proposal would meet or not meet that requirement. That's the threshold. We need to put enough words in here so that way a developer can meet that requirement. That's a burden we have to meet that the state doesn't put on themselves. So that's why a lot of regulations from 1990s on and 2000s mostly, because I think this JM came out in 2006 or something. Things started to get a little bit more chunky because we simply needed to cover our bases because we could get an appeal for some of the vagueness. So we certainly know there's room in here for improvement. Staff is not telling you this is perfect. There's a lot of room for improvement. And I think the Planning Commission has a lot of good ideas. And I think we would appreciate additional insight and additional ideas as to where we can explore. And we'll be diving in on that to start making a red line probably in March. So.
Okay, thank you. Alex.
Hi, let me really show myself if I can. There we go. First of all, a one-liner. The worst part of the regs is the lighting requirements. There's like 15 pages of lighting requirements that come before the DRB on a regular basis. But what I wanted to say was in relation to the complexity is, and I've been before because I unwittingly bought a house in the historic district. And everything we've done to this house has to go before design review and the DRB. But in order to do that, and no matter how helpful the planning department staff is, you have to read an enormous amount of material to figure out what you can and can't do. And there's no index and there's no way to search it. So part of the complexity and the layering is a matter of access, of being able to sort of get into that document and figure out what parts apply. And it's for developers and it's for owners. I mean, developers are obviously more equipped to do it, but I'm a very well-educated owner with a legal background. I should be able to do it, but it was very frustrating. And that's, I think, a fairly easy fix. I mean, it may cost a little bit, it may take some time, but I've looked at planning documents from regional commissions around the state, documents that explain how the process works, that are written in clear and accessible language. And that will go a long way toward reducing frustration, I think.
Thank you, Alex. Peter, and then Sandy, then Lauren, then, I'm sorry, Peter, then Lauren, then Sandy, then me. That's the cue. Peter, if you are trying to speak right now, we cannot hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. There's some elephants in the room here. I'll just mention 3. One is there are the regulations themselves, which Tim and Alex just put their fingers on. Then there is the implementation of it with staff, and staff is very well-meaning and they can be very helpful, but they toe the line. They are very conservative. They are afraid of lawsuits. Et cetera. That's the second. The third is NIMBYs and appeals. Now, there's been a kind of a strange and I think ill-advised way to address this by raising the appeal rate to $1,600 to scare off NIMBYs. But that's also going to create a whole host of other problems, and I think something that you guys should be looking at. And finally, Mike has been very modest, and in being modest, he's been disingenuous. He was a major factor in this new write-up. And this write-up was a technical fix whose main purpose was to get more and more properties conform. We had so many non-conforming properties. And that's one of the things that made this huge. This could be modularized so that the things that you have to put in there for Act 250 or whatever legal things could be in sort of a legal addenda. And we should do what Alex is suggesting, which is have the parts that need to be used by everyday people to be comprehensible. When I tried to do one of my projects and I went in, I was told, get a lawyer, get a surveyor, get an architect. Bang. Right there, you're talking about, $100,000 before you even put a spade in the ground. So I think you're on the right track in thinking, Tim, that it needs to be done over. On the other hand, I think when you say it needs to be done over, you're not saying that there isn't a lot of stuff in there that would be in the new one, but it might be as appendices. Create a stream that allows developers and homeowners to do what they want to do. I attended a DRB meeting that was painful to watch. Where Cody Chevrolet wanted to put a new sign to replace a sign that they'd had for years that was destroyed, and they practically had what's his name, Cody, who's been a citizen and of this state of this city for since he was a child. He had to practically get on his knees and beg. It was horrible. All right, thank you. I got someone ringing my doorbell. Sorry.
Thank you. Lauren?
Thanks. So, yeah, I was just thinking about kind of Tim's broader question about like feedback on how to approach this, and just listening to the conversation, it seems like, I'm wondering if AI could do this for us. Like, what is the set of things that we legally need to do so that we can maintain our downtown designation, our Act 250 Tier 1 designation, to get the Act 250 exempted? Like, there's a whole set of things that we just have to include because we want the other things that go along with them. And so, like, we can only simplify so much. And so let's not inadvertently shoot ourselves in the foot by making some mistake there. I guess just looking through the regs, my question to Tim and Sandy on the approach is the problem that there are a lot of things that we are requiring that you think we just shouldn't be requiring at all, and we could just delete whole sections? Or is it that it's overcomplicated in how we're wording it, so it's confusing and just difficult? Like, looking through the sections, a lot of it seems like stuff we would want to consider, and so in one way or another. And there might be ways to simplify it, and then just, taking Mike's advice on making sure that we do that in thoughtful ways so we don't create vagueness and ongoing issues. But that's one question I have, is like, is there a bunch of things that from your perspective, like you are saying, I just don't think we should be considering that at all? Or is it more like we could do a lot of this in much simpler ways, or just have fewer requirements around lighting or whatever, but like we should still have some consideration of lighting? So I guess that's one question for how you're thinking about approaching it. Like, yeah, because I think it could look very different depending on like, to me, of where we're heading with this. Because I do think there's a lot of issues that are flagged in there that are worth considering somehow, especially as we move away from, like, there's not going to be Act 250 oversight of it anymore. So it's going to be on the city to consider some things that might have captured for at least bigger projects.
That's gonna be tough. That's not a sure thing.
And then just one other thought, like the appeals is obviously a big conversation, and our committee might want to talk about that soon, as there's like the state level conversation, as Sandy or Alex or someone had mentioned. It seems like us spending a lot of time thinking about changing our appeals process as that state conversation is going on might be kind of wasted time, because if they change it, then we might want to weigh in and share some like ideas and examples with this at the State House. So if we wanted to kind of have a small group thinking about that, and like the experience that people are having here and examples and potential solutions, that could be useful. But that seems like another important one. But yeah, I guess it's just a big picture question of like, are you two proposing that there's a whole lot that we look at that we should just delete altogether? Or is it that we really need to simplify but probably it's a lot of the same things.
Tim, Sandy, or Sandy, do you want to answer those
Yeah,
questions?
I do. Yeah, so I in my brain have a couple of other points I wanted to circle back on. I would like to make a suggestion to the committee that we reach out to people who have started the application process in the last 5 years, whether or not they actually got to a review or an approval, and invite them to send an email or maybe even somehow, you know, give a boiled down speech. I don't know, but it would be helpful to hear from people. The next thing is, I think, well, Mike outlined about the city and other municipalities taking over increasing responsibility for review as Act 250 is yielded to local decision makers, particularly for priority housing. Um, there are criteria. I was the consultant for Plainfield last year as they went through the NDA process. And it's actually very straightforward. There's a checklist that's like quite a few pages long online that you have to make sure that your ordinance includes those pieces. Mike has already included most of them, to my knowledge, for instance, complete streets. I wanted to point out that I've also been in conversations with East Montpelier about the idea of creating an overlay district for priority housing that basically just removes any requirements. Because if you could say, and this is extreme, but if you could say that this is where we want housing, you developers suggest what you think will work best. And that there's like no setback rules or no density rules. I know it's scary. It's mostly scary in where we already have established neighborhoods with infill, but having that kind of gross conversation, the large scale conversation that needs to be nuanced by where it is in Montpelier is important. I think we also need to separate out development in our conversations. What's needed for housing with this whole Act 250 and priority housing issue versus any other kind of development. I agree it's not fair to make people go through months of hardship to get. I had a client last year with all he wanted was a staircase and a railing. And actually, I think that the whole planning department was very helpful with that, but it was just a long process, including getting public works approval. So breaking down the content or the type of project, also breaking down the process, and then yes, the hearing and appeals. If we could make those kind of general categories, that might help us be more direct and efficient. Thank you.
Sandy, one question for you later on, because in our conversation, you found when you went through the regs, for another project that you were looking at, you found there are 5 different types of planning and developments within our code, which seemed like something that's just kind of layered up over the years. Did you want to mention that?
If I could just answer, yeah, I mean, I've just spent the last, as I said, 2 weeks looking at the PUDs. And I actually want to congratulate Mike because I was like freaked out when I started looking at them, comparing against, for instance, Plainfield actually has more development than Montpelier right now, actively moving forward. So, but as I dove into it, it's very clear what each of those tools is intended for. I would say some of them feel overly narrow in what the build out is, but I actually really now I see why we have them. And I I I I don't think they're necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a larger question of how we review and regulate priority housing when it's a priority for the whole state. And do we need to let go of our control? And if you don't have any regulation, then it cannot be appealed, right? What can be appealed is the process and the decision making. So if you say, there's no restrictions on housing in this part of Montpelier. And then a developer says, oh, we can afford to build this. And it goes through whatever review process. The only thing that can be appealed is what is the review process.
So,
That's why in the 1970s, people didn't want any zoning at all. Because you could
Okay.
do whatever you wanted with your land in Vermont.
Thank you, Sandy. I'm gonna, because we have about 10 minutes left, I'm gonna do
you.
2 minutes for Tim on anything else you had to say related to Lauren's question of like simplify or, start over essentially. Or are there big sections that you would really focus on? Then we're gonna go over to Ben, and then I'm gonna basically propose a path forward. Okay.
I guess on the part of the piece, Lauren, too, is Act 250 keeps getting mentioned, and I think we all do this. We assume Act 250 is the state. It's a process within the state, but even if we don't have Act 250 review, you still have A&R, you still have wetlands review, you still have stormwater review, you still have all the things they review with their professionals that they still have jurisdiction and can come in and do. So just because you don't have Act 250 review doesn't mean you're out there with no oversight. And there's a lot of professionals that's their career with the state, and like the wetlands people, that's what they do. And we just don't have the kind of budget in a town this size to have people with the same positions in Montpelier. So we need to rely on the state resource, I think, for those aspects of review. And then, yeah, I've gone through this and a number of times trying to say, how can I be constructive? What are the little things we can change? And that's where I've come out and just said, wow, there's just so much. And it's hard to not dive into minutia on any one project and trying to stay at the higher level with this. Because I know projects I've gone through, and if you can dissect them and say, why do we do this? It's like, how can we bring it back to being a good process, giving the protections we need in zoning? Because I believe we need zoning and restrictions at a reasonable level. There's just a lot of ground between that level I feeling and this code.
Okay. Ben?
Yeah, I guess it's more a question for Mike. Does ACCD or somebody else provide model zoning regulations, particularly ones that would like allow us to meet tier 1A?
No, not that I know of. They have model flood hazard regulations, but I don't think the state, not since the 70s or 80s, has had. I mean, back in the day, they used to have model regulations that were very small, that left it up for planning commissions and folks to adopt, that, as I said, they just don't meet the requirements. And a lot of those smaller regulations work perfectly fine if you're a Woodbury or a Calais. You've got a different scale, a different set of constraints. It's the more density and the more you have, the more complex your rules just have to become in order to start dealing with the number of details that you want to be looking at. Now, we don't have to be looking at all those, and I think the Planning Commission is taking that approach right now. As we've been going through, we have discussions, and we already have done a lot of things. We have already made sketch plan, and small subdivisions are now administrative. They're no longer have to go to the DRB. So we've shifted a lot to administrative decisions that used to go to the DRB. Not all DRC applications go to the DRB. There's actually some design review rules that don't even go to the DRC, that are just administered because we've got the rules. Yes, they're more detailed, but they're more detailed, and that allows us to be able to administer them in-house without having to go to the DRC. It gives us that ability. But no, there's no model that's out there for us to kind of rely on.
And I'm sorry, this is just another.
Yep.
I just don't know this. Like, how much difference are there between like our regulations in Brattleboro's or St. Albans, or do you know what I mean? Like, thinking about the 24 designated downtowns, all of them have to have.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how much discrepancy are there between those?
A lot of it actually comes down to who the consultants were that they were hired. If you look at ours were done by Brandy Saxton, who probably did 20 or 30 sets of regulations. So you've got the Brandy Saxton model. You also have the Sharon Murray model. So if you were to go to Waitsfield, Warren, she worked with Brian Shoup, who's over in Waitsfield. So you have a whole set, and she used to be up in Northwest RPC. So you've got a whole set that kind of follow her model. I had written my own model that I did in Lamoille. So if you were to look at Lamoille, you'd see all of those are very similar in format, because you know, as the rules changed in like 2005, I was working with the state in 2005 when that big change went through. And so I felt it was necessary to update the model. And because I was a planner doing it for each town, I created my own model, and I think that's a great model. But each one depends on the user and how you work through the zoning. And so if depending on your style, you're going to write the regulations that make it easier. We've got backwards and forwards. Do you put the zoning districts in the front, or do you put the zoning districts in the back? And do you put the process in the front or the process in the back? And it's just how you want to do it. And this is the way Brandy arranged it, and not the way I would have done it, but that's perfectly fine. It works, and we can go through and clean this up and take pieces out. You know, there's a whole section, part 4. You can go through most of part 4 and say, these regulations shall be administered in accordance with Title 24, Chapter 117, period. Throw all the rest of the paper out. But we put it in there so that way if people want to know, you don't have to go to the statutes to read them. You can read them right here. So there are things that could be shortened simply by referencing statute and tightening them up. And that's what the Planning Commission is really looking at right now. We went through, as we said, we were just going through site plan at the last meeting, and we were talking about right now, lighting. I think Alex pointed out lighting. We're like, lighting applies to all these projects. Should these be applying to housing projects, or should these just be applying to commercial projects? And if they are, let's see how we can adjust the applicability statement to make it so that way housing up to 6 units is exempt from this. And so they're thinking about exactly what you guys are mentioning is, let's look at this rule and decide, should all of this be exempt or some of this be exempt? Is it doing its job okay? And they are looking at that. But I think they are, as we said, if people have other ideas of, here's another piece that needs a more careful look, they're willing to put that on the list. They're like, put it on our list. We'll put it on the list. We'll talk about it. Of this is an issue, and they'll weigh it with what's the value of that. Was put in there for a reason. Is that a reason that is of a high enough level?
So for us, as we go through this, how do you see the housing committee fitting in? Is there a way we can assist in the process?
Go there.
Sorry.
Wanna let Ben finish his.
Oh,
That's it. That's it.
That was
Okay.
No,
Sorry
that's the question.
sorry to interrupt.
No, that was
you.
the question.
So, you know, for input, I mean, for us, if people have gone through these and highlight very specific, I know Alan is online. Alan, as he reads through these for his projects, will go through and note things. Some of them are just typos. He's like, no, this one is misworded, and it says, you know, parcels, and it should say parcel. You're absolutely right. We'll highlight that. It's on a technical fix. That's a good technical fix. Other times it's, I don't know if my project should be required for this. That's a problem. And then it's a policy discussion. As staff, I have no vote. All I can do is say, these could be the potential consequences, or we agree and say, actually, that's a pretty good idea. That actually we hadn't thought about that, and that would be a barrier. Let's go and put that in front of the Planning Commission to put it on a list. But I think that the harder one is when we get some of the vaguer things. Just make it smaller.
Yeah.
That's not something we can just do. It's based on the way the things are. We can do some tweaking, but if there's a specific section, you know, we can, as we said, there are certain things we can shorten up, but there are also certain things of, it used to just say your height is 35 feet. Now we have to go through and say, okay, it's 35 feet. How is that measured? Because if it's uneven ground, is it the average? Does it include the cupola? Does it not include the cupola? And that's just height. And then you've got setbacks. Okay, are we measuring setbacks to the foundation? Do we measure it to the building? Do we measure it to the drip edge? And we've got to be very specific. Where do we measure from? Is it from the center line of the road or is it from the edge of the right of way? And we have to have all of that detailed out because there's going to be somebody on the other side who doesn't like this project, who is going to start picking. So we've got to have all these kind of detailed out. So we've got the ability to push back. But we will, as we said, a lot of it when it comes to housing and you guys, that is a priority for the Planning Commission right now. How do we streamline the process, which is actually quite streamlined right now, to make sure that we're not requiring unnecessary environmental reviews or not necessarily engineering reviews, I should say. We aren't looking at necessarily cutting back on environmental reviews. But is that engineering requirement necessary, or can we get away with something less because that's costly?
So let me move us forward.
Okay.
Thank you. Recognizing the time. So it sounds like there are challenges for some developers in managing these regs and understanding these regs. And the city staff recognize that this is an imperfect document and are working through the planning commission process to evolve it and adjust it, taking an incremental approach. Tim, you and Sandy have said, maybe we should do something more sweeping. That question we've been discussing to some, degree tonight. I think there are things we could do. One, we could talk some big picture about the principles that would be guiding us in any type of recommendations that we would be put forward. We could take those principles and then we could say, all right, well, let's look at then how to apply them in the development regs. So would we, and there are all these different towns, maybe you grab a few different towns, regs in Vermont that you think are doing this well. And we look at them vis-a-vis those, or if there are other communities, we could outside of the state, we could look at those as well. But it seems like we need to go like macro to micro here, like start with the principles that would guide us and then look at, okay, well, so what do we want? What issues do we want to even tackle? And perhaps we test like 2 to 3 concepts with the Planning Commission. Okay. Here are a few things we would recommend. What are their reaction to that? And so we start small and see if you can get any traction in that and then grow bigger. So that's my proposal, which would be to start at the principle level. If folks have energy to have that conversation, what principles would guide us here? And then we could that committee working on this could get a little bit more granular and come back with some suggestions. How does that land with folks here? Lauren?
And one thought, and I know one of our team members had mentioned the idea of doing some like maybe informal surveys even. Like I'm curious, like what are the pieces of the regs that are causing the biggest challenges for developers and like focusing our energy on those sections and those items, because we could spend a lot of time on things and everyone's like, it actually was working fine. Like, so I just want to make sure like we're focusing our limited time, and that could go into principles. Like,
Yeah,
I like that approach, but I liked the idea, and maybe the planning commission has already done this and there's some document, or you could talk to them and get some feedback, but having this be informed so that we're shaping the principles based on addressing the things that are actually causing problems.
Sounds great.
Important.
Anything else on the approach? I want to recognize we're a couple minutes over, and I'm going to wind us down. So Lauren's saying, yes, let's move forward with this approach, but let's keep it focused on the biggest challenges. Let's not get overbroad here. Anything else? Or can you directional, like your, how excited you are about having that conversation, like thumbs up, thumbs medium, thumbs down, thumbs up, kind of, yeah, you're like sort of. Sandy, okay, Ben, your thumbs up, Carrie, your thumbs up. Alex is no, Alex, are you into it? Thumbs up, okay, Sandy, are you into it? Yes, okay, great, all right. So I will add that into a future meeting. So at our next meeting, we're gonna talk about priorities, big picture. We're gonna talk about the vacancy tax, vacancy fee, vacancy ordinance. Vacancy ordinance, we're gonna talk about vacancy ordinance. And I will, if we have time, put the principles conversation on that. Maybe you can start thinking about it, Tim and Sandy, kind of principles for you as you think about this, and we can have the conversation. I'm trying to have a call with a developer at least once or twice a week to get perspective that's informing my role on this committee. And so I'll continue to do those calls and try to bring those perspectives in into that conversation too. Sorry to keep you a little long tonight. Thank you so much for having this conversation. Thank you so much to Tim and Sandy who have done so much work. And Alan, you're on my list to call, so get ready. All right, we'll see everyone later. Take care.
Thanks.